several bits of consistency or hooks or sub-themes.
Yeah, one of the things you'll notice in this expansion is within a given zone or area, there's a lot more diversity in the music. So depending upon where you're going in a given zone, you might transition into some music that, again, is related to either a race or a story theme that you might hear it just in a small area when you're in a lower level area, but then as you expand and get up to level 40, you might be in an area where you start to hear this music a lot more, and you've heard it once as you were progressing through the levels. So there's all the different Cataclysm themes are spaced quite diversely throughout the various continents and zones.
Since you brought up the opening music, I know that as we've progressed from expansion to expansion, that has also progressed. And I have listened to the music, and I found that it is very rich and layered. And that seems to be the same thing with the opening music. Can you talk a little bit more about that login music and what people can expect?
The purpose of the login music has been to provide an overture and a background to show people who might be creating their first character and taking the time to read the descriptions and might spend more than 30 seconds in those screens just to log in. It's to give them a sense of what's to come and show some peaks and some valleys and some contrasts. And these are the dangerous sort of themes and the warlike themes, or the romantic or beautiful themes, and also show a cross-section of the entire history of World of Warcraft. So with each one, we've tried to include quotes from melodies that represent the original 2004 release, and Burning Crusade, and Wrath of the Lich King, and then a little something new from Cataclysm. So it's really meant to be an exploration through all those peaks and valleys and the adventures that you'll have, somewhat faction agnostic and race agnostic, so that there's a little something for everybody. And if for any reason, well, as Derek mentioned earlier, when you start to go through and level up, you'll hear some of those themes come back, and then on subsequent listenings, if for some reason you spend more than a few seconds in the login screen, that theme will come back and it'll suddenly have meaning and context for you, and it'll take you somewhere. So at first listening, it'll just seem like a long piece of epic music, but on subsequent listenings over many months or years, it becomes the meaning becomes more personal. So I think that's the intent behind the diversity in the music, and the reason that it's pretty long and explores a lot of different moods.
I was going to say it's a journey, but it seems like it's a much longer journey than we've had before. About how long are we looking at for the opening? Since we keep expanding on it, it's definitely worth the listen too.
I don't think it will ever really get any longer, but this one sits at about 12 minutes, and it's and our intention in the future is to swap out some of the older themes for the newer themes. Sure. We did that this time. It begins with the primordial core of the elemental planes, and how things are in chaos and disarray, and Deathwing has flown, and everything's a mess. So that familiar 7/4 march that everyone knows and expects, it takes a while to happen. It's struggling against all these musical imagery, if you will, and when it finally happens, it's almost like, okay, there's that familiar foothold. It almost, that once kind of dark warlike march actually becomes kind of a sense of hope that, okay, this is still the world we know, and then it progresses to the more beautiful and romantic themes, and takes you on that journey. So it, in terms of length, it's what felt right, and also what filled up an orchestral recording session nicely, which is of a fixed length, and we wanted to make good use of our musician time.
I think also that noticing of the layers getting added on or is just part of that development of the sort of the musical language that has become World of Warcraft, or that World of Warcraft is creating. And that's something that Russell did fantastically in the main titles. And with we had 5 composers working on the score, so between Glenn, Neil, David, Russell, and myself, you have all this contributing to the different layers that get cross-connected in that musical language that continues to develop and is sort of culminated in the main title each time.
I definitely think that people need to take the time when they first log in just to listen to it, that's for sure. So I have to ask, what's your favorite piece, your personal favorite piece from this new expansion?
I certainly had the most fun working on my music for the Goblins. Using the pitch percussion, the marimbas and xylophones, and then incorporating the whistling, because they're very, they're workers, they're a little playful, as well as being, deviant and whatnot. So it was a chance to kind of go in a direction I don't normally go to in the Warcraft universe. So that was pretty satisfying for me.
For me, one of the zones I ended up working on was the Dunmora, all the snowy zones from around where Ironforge is and the regions
so you're back
beyond.
In the snow.
Yeah, and I wanted to something that plagued us when we were working on Wrath of the Lich King was, how do you say cold and snowy and not just go to some cliche, and so faced with that again in a way, what did it for me was I ended up writing a piece called Cold Mountain. At least that's the working title of it, and at the time I was writing that, a beloved family pet, a cat who was 19 years old when she ultimately passed away, she was in her last days, and I just took some of the emotion that I was feeling and put it into that space as I was writing the music. And I think what came to pass then was, people don't need to know how I came to write it, but if they get a sense of the emotion in it, then it's become a little more than a piece of background music. And so for that reason, I'm really proud of that one.
Right, something they can take into their heart. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So this one's for you, Trudy, the cat.
I have tons of favorites of the other. There's several by David. His War March and his Firelands piece were really wonderful. Neil Acree, his Ajara Daytime piece and his Mystery Q. Glenn's Arathi Highlands. Russell's music for the Lost City that he did for one of the instances in Uldum. All these are just, I've been walking around singing these for the past several months, just because part of what I did after we got all the music in was sort of get it together and start placing it and assigning it in the world. And so that was many, many hours where just every night, even after work, going home and putting the headphones on and falling asleep while I was just listening to everybody else's music, trying to sort of internalize it so that I had that big musical palette to draw on when we spread it out over the world. So I mean, it's definitely really hard to single out things because everybody's just done amazing music.
Sort of like picking your favorite child.
Yeah.
I have to also just chime in on Glenn Stafford wrote, Derek mentioned Arathi Highlands, also Western Plaguelands. Just the names belie the beauty of the music. It's so cool. And then David Arkenstone wrote a series of pieces for Highjaw, in particular Nordrasil, the World Tree, and he really succeeded in capturing that same vibe that I think is so important in World of Warcraft, that you get a sense of like this might be ancient music about ancient things, about a tree that was created as the result of events 10,000 years ago, and there are whole races that are protecting, they're the guardians of this space and of all these energies that are contained within. And the song is worth so many thousands of words, and I can't say enough. You just have to hear it. It's beautiful, moving music, and it really adds a lot to the soundscape of Cataclysm.
So what aspects of Cataclysm inspired you the most for the soundtrack? Was there anything that kind of stood out for you as, wow, this I've got to write for?
Well, speaking for myself, the inspiration always comes from a combination of the gameplay and early on the concept art. For many weeks, if not months, the concept art and hallway conversations with the designers on the World of Warcraft team are all we have to go on. But it's a lot. It really helps, and this stuff gels for a long time in our minds and becomes the inspiration. And then ultimately, when we get inside the game and start looking around, these areas and events and the stories, they just speak to you. I also, I mentioned earlier, I read Christy Golden's The Shattering book, an early draft.
Which is not out yet.
A long time ago. And
right.
And it really helped ground me in the depth and breadth of what's going on in Azeroth, and what's Thrall doing in seeking to commune with the elementals and figure out what's tearing Azeroth apart, and what are the druids having to do to, as we say in our soundtrack titles, restore the balance.
Right.
All that informs our composition.
Yeah, from the concept art to the gameplay too, like Russell mentioned, the lore. I know there's a balance between all of that and then what works in the context of the game. I know my gut reaction when I first started flying through, especially a lot of the older areas that had been, torn up and hurt by there was a real sense of sadness, because these are places that, I grew up questing in those
right.
places,
all when?
All of 5-6 years ago. Yeah. when my wife was pregnant, we were over there and this and that. And all these, I remember getting a screenshot of the two of us up on the dams of
right.
Loch Modan or whatever.
Remember watching the moon rise?
Yeah. And a lot of these places are just completely, they're destroyed, or they're turned upside. They're not the same places anymore. So there was a real sadness at look what's happened to my world, as but then balancing that where there's a lot of new alliances, and there's a lot of other things happening, and
some new beauty too.
We can't just
right.
we can't just make it all about
right.
personal feelings. So there's a lot of things to explore and allow us to sort of express ourselves and find the way to help the story along. So
I wanted to move on to the sound design, because you had mentioned